Before we begin, I would highly encourage you to watch 2 other videos before watching this one. The first is my video on Gaster's Roaring Delta and how I believe he, the Knight, and Device Friend are meant to be a group of 3 demons which serve as an idea of an anti-game developer, the anti-Toby Fox. The other is my video on why I thought the secret boss ERAM could be the 8-bit version of the Roaring Knight, playing from a separate game console in a battle against Chris for the sake of fun. I had a thought since then, a different one, and that thought is in regards to how Device Friend relates to ERAM. It's important to mention that ERAM isn't the Shadow Mantle. ERAM claims to hold the Shadow Mantle. The Shadow Mantle is a separate thing that ERAM is holding. However, there are a few indicators to suggest that the Shadow Mantle is alive. First of all, the sprite which flies off of Chaos King at the end of Chapter 1 is called Shadow Mantle, and flies away much like a bat. If this is the case, this adds to the idea that Device Friend's real name might be Dingbat. If Device Friend can image a cat and a snake already, perhaps it can also image a bat. Indeed, I believe it may be possible that if ERAM is merely an 8-bit representation of the Knight, the Shadow Mantle may be Device Friend. Let's suggest this idea. The card Castle Dark World is created, the Knight shows up, and with Chaos King disillusioned with the absence of the Lightners, Chaos King instead turns to the Dark Knight. The Knight, the harbinger of Hell's Roar, comes disguised as an angel, claiming to be a holy figure bringing the exact change King is looking for. There is some evidence to suggest the Knight did not directly meet the Chaos King, instead speaking to Jevil first. He speaks to Jevil, and gives Jevil the Shadow Mantle. He tells Jevil he intends to set the Spade King in a position of power and authority over the Dark World. Jevil then runs to tell the Chaos King, and Jevil gives the Shadow Mantle to the Chaos King. Jevil is the Knight's prophet, and Chaos King is the royal figure heading the Dark World. In this sense, Chaos King is anointed by the Knight's unclean spirit, the Knight's mantle, Device Friend. It is a symbol that the Chaos King has the Knight's unholy blessing to go forth and bring Hell's Roar. The King believes the Knight to be holy, but Jevil knows the true nature of the Knight is to bring Hell's Roar. After the Chaos King is defeated, Device Friend flies away, abandoning the Chaos King. The Knight promised to provide the Chaos King with something the Lightners couldn't, a friend that would be with him in the dark, but the Knight's mantle flew away as soon as the King's usefulness had been fulfilled. After the sealing of Card Castle, the Shadow Mantle briefly moves to Sham's shop. Sham may not know the true nature of the Shadow Mantle, may not know of its ties to Hell, merely seeing its usefulness in resisting the Knight. The Shadow Mantle then flies to the library Dark World for a single reason, to watch the battle between Spamton and Chris. An entertaining spectacle it is. Regardless, the device then returns to its master, the Roaring Knight. Then we get to the sword route of Chapter 3, the game. The Roaring Knight wears the Shadow Mantle and they fight Chris together, merely to have fun in a twisted little game. Therefore, ERAM is not only the Knight, but the Knight and his friend together. Whereas the Knight wields ice magic, Device Friend wields fire magic. And then, this presents an interesting scenario in regards to getting it. Doing the sword route, donning the Shadow Mantle, and being knighted by the Roaring Knight, this is an awful scenario. This is awful because, in the Knight's eyes, you are now taking up that role the King had, to be a howling squire, the Knight's little pawn. In this sense, the Chapter 3 secret boss is the Knight testing your strength, as well as your desire to play games, to see if you are a worthy candidate to carry on its will. If this is the case, I do believe that appearances of Device Friend in the future will change depending on whether or not you have the Shadow Mantle. Perhaps the mantle will escape your inventory, like Rule's card did in Chapter 2, and that's a sign the device is messing around with stuff in that dark world. I feel like, if Gaster and Friends is meant to exist as a parallel to the Unholy Trinity, like I suggested in a previous video, this presents some interesting parallels. If the Knight is a parallel to the Antichrist, and Device Friend is a parallel to the Antichrist's spirit, then the idea of this character resting over the knight's pawn like a garment does have roots in religious symbolism. Anointing in the Bible is a symbol that God's Spirit is with an individual, which is symbolized in many things, such as oil over a person's head, the waters of baptism, or sometimes through a garment. So if the knight is the opposite, a harbinger of darkness, servant of Dr. Gaster 666, it's possible the Dark Knight's anointing is through a different garment. Now, although I have lost confidence in the idea that the knight is the Black Knife over time, I do kind of want to return to it in this video. I did have an idea that the knight was resurrected as a Darner, and that her dust was sprinkled over the knife members of the Neo Chess Roaring group chat used to make their dark worlds. That way, the knight is involved in the creation of the dark worlds, but that the knight is still locked inside of them. I no longer think the knight can so easily be called a Darner. I do think, however, that the knight may easily be called a demon. A monster who fell into the darkness and was morphed into an amorphic image of a deer's skeleton. I think it's possible the knight is still locked to the dark worlds, and that the knight's presence is somehow tied to the knife. I could see this being the case if Gaster somehow sprinkled Dess's dust over the knife, then got it to Carol somehow. If this is the case, then perhaps what Susie saw in the light world was not the knight, but Carol, or one of her associates who was able to drag Undine's unconscious body to the bunker. If so, perhaps Device Friend, as a piece of Gaster's influence, is tied to a light world object as well. And, if so, I think the red horns are the perfect candidate. Horns which Chris didn't really use to be a devil so much as a member of the goat family, and Chris somehow lost the horns after Gaster's influence took over. That way, it's not literally in-universe devil horns, but the symbolism is still there. This part of the theory isn't backed up by much, I just wanted to bring it up. So, if all this is the case, I think it explains why ERAM uses fire magic instead of ice magic. Phase 1 of the secret boss used Device Friend's signature fire moves, then Phase 2 used Dess's signature ice magic. Perhaps Dess and Device Friend are also dueling partners, regularly dueling in combat for fun. To me, then, I see the Knight and Device Friend as two different entities who both give the shadow crystals to the secret bosses. The Knight and Shadow Mantle both gave the crystal to Jebel, perhaps the Shadow Mantle gave the shadow crystal to Spamton, the Knight kept hold of the third crystal, and finally, the Knight gave the crystal to Jerson while the Shadow Mantle could have been in Chris's inventory.